I was standing in the parking lot of my own company, the one I'd spent 11 years building from nothing, when my husband handed me a manila envelope and said, "I think it's better if we deal with this now." It was a Thursday morning in late October. The kind of cold that comes early in Calgary, the kind where your breath hangs in the air for a second before disappearing. I remember thinking the envelope felt too light for what was inside it. Divorce papers shouldn't weigh so little. My name is Ren Calloway. I'm 38 years old, and on the morning my husband gave me those papers, I was also the co-founder of a sustainable packaging company with contracts in 4 provinces, a board presentation scheduled for the following Monday, and absolutely no idea that my entire life was about to collapse and then, somehow, rebuild itself in a way I never expected. My husband and I had been together for 9 years, married for 6. His name is Owen, and for most of those years, I would have described our marriage the way you describe a good winter coat. Reliable, warm, something you stop thinking about because it always did what it was supposed to do. That's not a romantic description, I know that. But I also think most people, if they're honest with themselves, would recognize it. We weren't newlyweds anymore. We were partners. We ran a life together. We had a dog named Biscuit, and a mortgage on a semi-detached in Inglewood, and a tradition of driving out to Banff every year for our anniversary, even when we were too tired to really enjoy it. Then, about 4 months before that parking lot morning, Owen changed. It happened gradually enough that I kept finding excuses for it. He started working late, which I attributed to stress. His company had been going through a restructuring, and I knew it wasn't easy. He stopped asking about my day, which I told myself was just the rhythm of a long marriage. He slept on his side of the bed with his back toward me in a way that felt deliberate, but I convinced myself I was being paranoid. The truth is, I was scared to look too hard, because somewhere underneath all those excuses, I think I already knew something was wrong. I just didn't know what kind of wrong it was. I asked him once directly in the kitchen on a Sunday evening while he was loading the dishwasher and not looking at me. I said, "Owen, what's going on with you?" And I need an actual answer. He closed the dishwasher door. He stood there for a second with his hand still on the handle. Then he said, "Nothing. I'm just tired." Nothing. That word sat in the middle of our kitchen like something neither of us wanted to touch. 6 weeks later, he asked for a divorce. He didn't do it dramatically. That's what I keep coming back to. There was no shouting, no revelation, no moment of confession. He just came home one evening, sat down across from me at the dining table, and said he thought the marriage wasn't working anymore. When I asked him why, he gave me nothing concrete. He said he'd been unhappy for a while. He said he thought we'd grown in different directions. He said these things in the measured, rehearsed tone of someone who had practiced them, and every word landed like something cold and impersonal. I cried. I begged him to go to counseling. I asked if there was someone else, and he denied it, looking me straight in the eye with a steadiness that felt almost worse than if he'd looked away. I went through every possibility I could think of, something I'd done, something I'd missed, some fundamental failure in myself that I hadn't noticed, and I found nothing. No concrete reason. No inciting incident. Just Owen, sitting across from me at the table we'd bought together at a warehouse sale in 2019, telling me our marriage was over. The weeks that followed were the loneliest of my life. Owen moved into the guest room. We went through the motions of living in the same house, passing each other in the hallway, sharing a bathroom schedule, keeping things civil because we'd always been civil people, and neither of us knew how to stop. But the civility felt like a thick piece of glass between us. I could see him. I could speak to him. I just couldn't reach him. I threw myself into work. I always had, really. The company had been built on my habit of working through hard things rather than sitting with them. But this was different. This was less like productivity and more like running. As long as I was in the office, I didn't have to be in the house. As long as I was revising a pitch deck or reviewing a supplier contract, I didn't have to think about Owen's back turned toward me in the dark. Our lawyers had been in communication for about a month when his brother called me. I almost didn't pick up. It was a Tuesday evening, and I was parked outside a grocery store, too tired to go inside, staring at my shopping list on my phone. When his name lit up the screen, I sat there for 3 full rings, trying to decide if I wanted to have this conversation. We'd always gotten along reasonably well. His brother was quieter than Owen, steadier. The kind of person who thought carefully before he spoke. But I had no idea what he wanted from me, and I wasn't sure I had the energy to find out. I answered anyway. Ren. He sounded strained. I need to talk to you about something. Not on the phone, though. Can we meet? We met the next day at a coffee shop on 17th Avenue. He was already there when I arrived, sitting with both hands wrapped around a mug, looking like he hadn't slept. I noticed the dark circles under his eyes and something else. A hesitancy, a reluctance. The look of someone carrying something they weren't sure they should be carrying. He waited until I sat down. Then he said, I think you deserve to know what's actually happening. What he told me over the next 40 minutes rearranged everything I thought I understood. About 8 months earlier, Owen had discovered something serious about his business partner. A man he'd run his financial consulting firm with for 7 years. His partner had been systematically skimming client accounts. Small amounts moved carefully over a long period of time. The kind of fraud that's designed to be invisible. By the time Owen found the irregularities, the total missing was somewhere in the range of $380,000 across multiple accounts. Owen had confronted his partner privately. His partner had denied it, then threatened to implicate Owen in the scheme, to manufacture enough evidence to make it look like Owen had known or participated. Owen had gone to a lawyer, then to a forensic accountant, then into a months-long process of gathering documentation to protect himself and prepare a proper complaint. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, he had decided to ask me for a divorce. His brother leaned forward across the small table. He convinced himself that if the investigation went public, it would come out during discovery that you two were married, that you had a joint account, that the firm had done work with some of your suppliers. He thought it would pull you and the company into it. I stared at him. He thought divorcing me would protect me. He thought separating your assets and your legal status, before everything went public, would keep you clear of it. Yes. I didn't say anything for a long moment. Outside, a bus went by on 17th. Someone at the next table laughed at something on their phone. Why didn't he just tell me? I finally said. His brother looked tired, because he was ashamed, and because he was scared, and because he made a decision that was completely wrong, and I've been telling him that for 2 months, and he wouldn't listen. I drove home in a kind of stunned silence. I sat in the driveway for 20 minutes just holding the steering wheel. I wasn't ready to go inside. I wasn't ready to look at Owen knowing what I now knew, because I didn't yet know how to hold it, whether to hold it as a reason or an excuse or something else entirely. What I felt wasn't relief. I want to be honest about that. I felt furious. I felt the specific, deep anger of someone who has spent months believing she wasn't loved enough, wasn't enough, and who has just found out that the whole time there was a reason she was never allowed to know. I had cried in the dark. I had replayed every conversation looking for where I'd gone wrong. I had questioned my marriage, my judgment, my entire understanding of the person I'd chosen to spend my life with. And the whole time, Owen had a reason. Owen had just decided that I wasn't someone who got to know it. That fury didn't go away when I walked inside. It was still there when Owen looked up from the couch with an expression that told me immediately his brother had called him after he'd called me. He stood up. Ren, don't, I said. Not yet. Give me a minute. I put my bag down on the hall table. I stood in the middle of my own living room, and I made myself breathe. Then I looked at him and I said, tell me everything. From the beginning, all of it. He did. It took almost 2 hours. Owen sat on the couch, and I sat in the armchair across from him. And he went through the whole thing. The first time he noticed the discrepancies in the accounts. The sick feeling he'd had checking and rechecking the numbers hoping he was wrong. The confrontation with his partner, the threat, the lawyers, the forensic accountant's report, the RCMP Financial Crimes Unit intake he'd filed 6 weeks earlier. He talked about the fear of dragging me in. He talked about the shame of the whole situation. Not just his partner's betrayal, but his own paralysis. His inability to figure out the right thing to do. His decision to remove me from the equation rather than bring me into it. His voice cracked twice. I noticed both times and I did not look away. When he finished, I sat there for a moment. "You made a decision about my life," I said. "A massive one. Without me, I know. You decided what I could handle, what I should be protected from, I know. That is not how marriage works, Owen." He looked at his hands. "No, it isn't. And the divorce papers you handed me in the parking lot." I panicked. He said it quietly. "My lawyer said the timing was critical, that we needed to move quickly before the investigation became public record. And I panicked and I did the wrong thing and I handed them to you without explaining anything and I—" He stopped. He pressed his hand over his eyes for a second. "I am so sorry. I know that doesn't fix it." I sat with that for a long moment. Outside, the wind picked up and rattled the back fence, the loose board we'd been meaning to fix since August. "Some things you keep meaning to get to." "We're not signing anything yet," I said. "We're going to find out what actually needs to happen legally to protect both of us. Together. And then we're going to figure out the rest." Owen looked up. He looked like someone who had been bracing for impact and couldn't quite process that it hadn't come yet. "Together?" he said. "Don't make me repeat myself," I said. "And call a family lawyer in the morning. Not a divorce lawyer. A family lawyer who can also liaise with your criminal defense team, because we're going to do this the right way." That night, we didn't sleep in the same room. I wasn't ready for that, but I sat at the kitchen table until almost midnight, not working, not reading, just sitting with a cup of chamomile tea that went cold in front of me, trying to understand the shape of what had happened. Here's what I kept coming back to. Owen hadn't stopped loving me. I know that sounds like a small thing given everything else. But when you've spent 4 months believing the opposite, it isn't small at all. He'd handled everything, catastrophically, infuriatingly, in a way that was going to take a long time to fully reckon with. But the underlying reason wasn't indifference. It was fear. Misguided, poorly executed, deeply frustrating fear, but fear that came from caring what happened to me. That didn't mean I was going to let him off the hook. I want to be clear about that. Understanding someone's reason is not the same as excusing the outcome. What Owen did, shutting me out, making unilateral decisions about my life, letting me believe our marriage had simply run out of steam while he was privately fighting a crisis I didn't know existed. That caused real damage. I had lived through 4 months of grief that didn't need to happen. I had questioned myself in ways that left marks. None of that disappeared because I now had context. But I also believed we could work through it, not easily, not without help. Not without Owen doing the hard ongoing work of learning to actually be a partner rather than a protector who acted alone. But I believed it was possible. And I had learned by then that I wasn't willing to give up on possible. The legal process took another 5 months. Owen's partner was ultimately charged. The forensic accountant's documentation was thorough enough that the attempt to implicate Owen was swiftly dismantled. There was simply no credible evidence connecting him to the scheme, and his proactive cooperation with the investigation made the picture clear. The firm was restructured. 3 of their long-standing clients stayed on. 4 didn't, which was a loss. Owen accepted without argument, saying it was fair. Our joint finances were reviewed as a precaution and cleared without issue. The company I'd built was never directly implicated. My board presentation went ahead on the Monday I'd originally planned it for. I presented with a tension headache and the particular focus of someone who has no choice but to keep moving. And it went well enough that we signed a new regional distribution agreement 2 weeks later. Owen and I started seeing a therapist in November. Not a couples counselor. A therapist who worked with both of us, sometimes together and sometimes separately, on the specific damage done. Owen worked on what his brother had identified accurately: the tendency to manage problems in isolation, to decide what other people could handle, to equate protection with control. I worked on the ways I'd turned his silence inward, made it about my own inadequacy. Let months go by without pushing harder for an honest answer. It wasn't a fast process. I won't pretend it was. There were sessions that left us both wrung out and quiet on the drive home. There were nights where the old hurt surfaced, and I lay awake in the dark feeling the full weight of those 4 months all over again. There were moments when Owen would reach for my hand, and I would let him, but with a slight hesitation that neither of us mentioned, that we both knew was there. But there were also other moments. The Saturday in February when we drove out to Banff and stood on a lookout point above Lake Louise in the kind of cold that makes your lungs ache, and Owen said very quietly, "Thank you for not giving up on us." And I said, "Don't thank me yet. We have a lot more work to do." And we both laughed, which felt like the first genuinely light thing between us in almost a year. Biscuit, our dog, for what it's worth, had been wildly indifferent to all of it. He slept through most of the difficult conversations. He continued demanding walks at exactly the same time every morning, regardless of what was happening in the house. There is something stabilizing about a creature who doesn't understand drama and simply needs to go outside. The divorce papers are still in the back of my filing cabinet. I haven't thrown them out. I'm not sure why, except that I think they're a reminder. Not of how close we came to ending, but of how much gets lost when two people stop communicating. How quickly a marriage can become a series of assumptions. How easy it is to decide you know what another person can or can't handle, and how much damage that decision can do. Owen made a terrible choice during one of the hardest periods of his life. He chose silence when he should have chosen honesty, and he let that silence do damage that took a long time to repair. I'm not going to minimize that. But I also know that the version of this story that ends with me signing those papers in a parking lot, alone, not knowing any of it, that version is the one that haunts me. Not because it was the worst outcome, necessarily, but because it was built on a lie of omission. A decision made without me, about me, by someone who loved me but didn't trust me enough to let me in. That's the part we've had to rebuild. The trust. Not just Owen's trust that I could handle hard things, though that too, but my trust that he would bring them to me. That we would face things together, whatever those things turned out to be. Last spring, we renewed the Banff tradition. We booked the same cabin we'd stayed in for our 3rd anniversary. The one with the wood-burning fireplace, and the view of the mountains that never gets old no matter how many times you see it. It was nothing dramatic. We ate dinner. We took Biscuit on a long walk through the snow. We sat by the fire and talked about a lot of things. And some of those things were still hard. But we talked about them out loud, together, without either of us deciding in advance what the other person was ready to hear. And somewhere in the middle of that conversation, I realized that this version of us, the one that had broken and had to put itself back together, the one that knew now what it could survive, was more solid than anything we'd had before. Not because the hard thing happened, but because we didn't let it happen to us separately.